10 light minutes in all directions is basically the extent to which you can mine Bitcoin and still be competitive on chain. Mars is, I think, like 14 minutes away, light minutes away. So Mars is basically already outside of the ability to mine on Bitcoin. That means that Mars will have to have another currency that it is using basically to transact for any economic stuff that happens there.
Hello and welcome to the Lewis and Kyle Show, an interview podcast where my friend Lewis and I interview really interesting people, entrepreneurs, CEOs, investors, creators, artists, sharing the best of what we learn from them with you.
In this conversation, we interview Brandon Green. Brandon is the chief of staff at Bitcoin Magazine, or BTC Inc. They have a number of companies in the Bitcoin space. It's the company behind the Bitcoin Miami conference that I went to back in June. That was really awesome. They write the articles that are syndicated on Cash App if you ever bought Bitcoin there, or pretty much any other major Bitcoin buying platform oftentimes syndicates their articles. So they're a major authority in the Bitcoin space. What Brandon does is he's the assistant to the CEO, among many other roles, such as being the person who coordinated all the awesome speakers for Bitcoin Magazine, so wears a lot of different hats within that organization. He joins us to discuss, first and foremost, why Bitcoin is good in his view, why his company and him personally have dedicated their career to improving the probability that Bitcoin gets adopted in society. We discuss kind of Bitcoin versus Ethereum is Bitcoin finally able to do the things that Ethereum was able to do with smart contracts and decentralized finance specifically. Towards the end, we get into some fun ideas like Bitcoin as a space currency, and we also discuss the main lessons from hosting the first 12,000 person event after COVID. It was a fun conversation. A lot of really educational ideas in the beginning and fun out there ideas towards the end, so you can look forward to that. We're going to switch over to it now. Enjoy.
Brandon, welcome to the Lewis and Kyle Show.
Excited to be here. Let's get into it.
Heck yeah. Okay, well, so Brandon, I don't know your exact title at Bitcoin Magazine or at Bitcoin Inc., whichever one you prefer, but I want to get into how you got there. So you graduated from the University of Alabama in 2017, and I don't know if you interned at Bitcoin Inc. before, or what's the story there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the quick backstory is I was chemical engineering at Alabama, Roll Tide, and I was in the fellows program there, and I was all set to be a master brewer trainee at Anheuser-Busch, but they didn't start until September of the year after I graduated. So I had a free summer. And I'm the kind of guy that's like, free summer, that sounds dauntingly boring. And so I wanted to find something cool that I could do. And David, who is our CEO, who you guys might be talking to later, he was a fellow as well and came down to Alabama to kind of talk to us. And, I talked to him and he had a very interesting and out of left field sort of perspective on a lot of the current issues. And I found that super engaging, and also just really kind of pushing the narrative in a lot of ways in directions that I hadn't really heard people push, and I wanted to just learn more. And so I found him afterwards. I was like, so this Bitcoin thing, is blockchain going to be the real thing? And he's like, no man, it's Bitcoin. And I was like, well, I got a free summer, can I come learn about it? And he was like, sure, come on. And so I did. That was the summer of 2017, and I never showed up to my brewery trainee program, and I just went full time into Bitcoin. So that's I guess the short rundown of how it happened.
So that was 2017.
So when you went there, go for it, Kyle. Yeah.
No, Lewis, you go ahead.
I was going to say, so when you went there as an intern, were you writing for the magazine? Were you doing research? Were you just fetching coffee? Where did you start?
I expected to show up moving boxes around. I had no clue. I didn't know anything about Bitcoin at the time. I had a laughable lack of understanding of what Bitcoin was. And so really I was expecting to be a set of hands, be able to kind of, plug in wherever I'm helpful and, just learn basically. And what ended up happening is that very quickly I was writing for the magazine. I was writing what I was learning kind of as I was learning it, and giving people that perspective, because that can be super helpful when you're getting into Bitcoin for the first time. So, I was doing a little bit of everything. But what I ultimately kind of settled into was this, less writer, but more of the actual operations side, and kind of being the right hand to David, our CEO. And so, we were in this hyper growth phase. You probably have seen the charts of Bitcoin, but 2017 was quite the year. and along with that came a whole lot of opportunity. And when opportunity comes knocking at your door, you're going to try and kind of accept as much as you possibly can. And every person has its limits in terms of how much they can actually accomplish. So David really needed just additional capacity to be able to just execute on things. And so that's kind of what I brought. And then all of the understanding of Bitcoin and kind of the really that level and that kind of schema of thinking came after long hours of working and understanding exactly what this entire ecosystem is. And it's a lot, let me tell you.
It's a lot, and it's changing a lot too. The first 5 months, I guess. So you start in the summer, and then December of 2017 is when we had the huge run up. Or that entire time was a bull market, right? So what was it like? What was the price when you started, and what was it? I guess it went to 20,000, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I started. I think the price was around like $1,700 a Bitcoin. Just laughably low. And I thought it was crazy high. I was like, should I even, put money into this because it's already at all-time highs? Like, what's going on? And obviously, in hindsight, and what I learned was that absolutely, this is the best performing asset and the best investment. This is not financial advice. The best investment, in the history of the world. So, that was kind of a realization that I had. And then, in terms of what was going on at the time, I don't know if you guys were too plugged in on what was happening, but it was a historic moment in Bitcoin where there was a real sort of debate happening about how do you scale this thing. Mm-hmm. This is a global, this is the block wars, right? So this is a global payments platform that can only support, a few transactions per second. When you're trying to onboard 7 billion plus people, how on earth do you allow them all to be able to use this thing and not get priced out? And so, you had kind of these two different segments of the community. One was a lot bigger than the other, but one was saying basically, we think that we should just make the Bitcoin blocks bigger. And the other one was saying we need to just move the bulk of transactions, their small transactions, completely off chain, and then just cryptographically secure it back onto the main chain through kind of some really cool cryptography. But those were the two kind of warring factions, and ended up splitting Bitcoin into two different chains, where you had the Bitcoin, the main chain, and then this kind of offshoot that just wanted to expand the block size. And the funny part about where I was is that I was actually learning about it, and so I was writing about it. And so, a few of the articles that we put out, I actually wrote as just a new intern noob, trying to figure out what was going on, and then just put it into plain person's, layman's words so that people could understand what was happening.
Yeah, I'm sure that those times were nuts. And looking back on it, even more so. But so we talked a little bit about how like Bitcoin is the all-time best investment, and it might be, and I think the number going up and it being a way to get rich is something that's attractive and a way to bring people in. But why do you think that Bitcoin is good outside of the financial gain that you get out of putting money into it? What economic problem in the world do you think it solves? And I know that you probably think it's more than just one problem.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to go, I think, to the core of why I'm passionate about it, it's because if you look at the world today, there are more people who have access to the internet than have access to running water. The ability to access the internet is hyper scalable. You have Elon Musk right now shooting satellites into the sky that will give global coverage of internet to the entire world using just a handful of satellites satellites here on Earth. And that thing will scale to where it costs basically nothing to connect to the internet. So that problem is getting solved. That's a much easier problem to solve than a lot of the other infrastructure problems that we have. Getting the world from a third world country, a place from the third world to be a developed world. And so what does it unlock when you're able to connect to the internet? Well, one thing that it doesn't unlock without Bitcoin is it doesn't unlock the access to financial tools. And, if you're going to be someone who is, pulling yourself out of poverty, you need to be able to access debt. be able to have a currency that you hold that can appreciate or doesn't just hyperinflate right underneath your feet while you're trying to do basic commerce. You have to, creating a one global value layer is incredibly interesting, because now all of the value that's created in the world can be realized in Bitcoin. And so that means that people who are, creating cool companies in the US are benefiting folks who are living and using Bitcoin in South Africa or Uganda or, Vietnam, wherever, because all that value accrues to the same asset. And so, it's a really weird kind of mental shift where ultimately what you're creating is you're creating one value system for the entire world. And that aligns incentives in a really interesting way and allows, all sorts of people to be pulled out of poverty. And I think, some of the aspects of Bitcoin that people like to, knock, for instance, the mining side of things, right? That's where you have all these computers that are, people like to say solving math problems. It's not exactly correct, but they're guessing random hashes. And by doing so, unlocking a block, getting block reward, it's very energy intensive, right? You've probably heard about that. Well, what that really is doing is it's putting a cost to create new Bitcoin. And so that means that you don't have miners or folks who are, building this chain who are enriching themselves with new Bitcoins. And instead, it immediately requires that Bitcoin to kind of circulate. And so, while you're also creating this, deflationary currency or, non-inflationary currency would be another way to look at it. What you're also doing is you're kind of preventing a ongoing centralization risk where ultimately, like what you see in the US and a lot of other developed countries that have, these inflation issues, is you see this, great centralization of wealth and power and influence because, you have this really easy way to kind of position yourselves towards where the money spout, the money spigot is, for lack of a better term. And you can just get, enriched by that. You don't have that with Bitcoin, or at least not to the same extent, due to the mining aspect. So I know that was a bit tangential and a bit rambly, but those are a couple of the things that I think that immediately attracted my interest when I looked at Bitcoin for the first time.
But why is it good? Why is it good for humanity? I understand that those are interesting features. Like it's all. I mean, it's an incredible technology. Like it's an exponential technology. But why is it good for humanity?
Yeah, I mean, it's I feel like the question is almost Schopenhauer-esque, right? It's the question of, is there anything that's good for humanity, or is there this what is it like oh shoot, what's the term? It's something like a philosophical pessimism, right? That says that all things that are created are not good. They're either bad or they're not bad, right? So, that's one way to look at it. What I would say, though, is that, the idea of being able to provide banking solutions or access to financial tools for people who otherwise wouldn't have them all around the world, and all they need is an internet connection, is the most powerful anti-poverty program you could possibly dream up. And so just in and of itself, if you want to find a way to get money in the pockets of people who otherwise wouldn't have access to money, Bitcoin is the greatest invention ever. And then everything else is, I would say dressing on top of, kind of that core value add.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I come back to the I don't know his first name, Antonopoulos, the guy with the crazy Andreas Antonopoulos, and how he says, like, when he's explaining Bitcoin to people, it's really, really hard to explain it to Americans and people in Europe. But when he goes to somewhere like El Salvador or Venezuela, they get it immediately because they are doing all these remittances. Like some X percentage of their GDP is made up of remittances, and when they do those remittances back to their country, 40% of it is just taken. It's gone. And so when you give those people access to their money that they earn with their time, it changes everything for them. And then on the other side of that, I think, is the problem of central banks and the money spigot that you're talking about. Like, I think it is a problem that anyone or any entity in the world has access to subverting like the natural order of capital coming from either like leverage and investment or time investment or labor. And because something exists outside of that natural law, like there's a problem, and it leads to bad outcomes. And so I think that central banks and just like the pain of these people not being able to control their money are two things that two reasons why Bitcoin is good for humanity.
Yeah, if I could drill into the kind of that last thing that you said, if you just take a step back and look at this from fresh eyes, and I were to tell you that, the way that we value the world today, aka, through the US dollar, our ability to price things, right, is controlled by basically a couple people. And your ability to make financial decisions for yourself that are, have a multi-year time horizon, your ability to, just plan your future ultimately rests on the judgment call of a couple folks who you will never meet. You'll never understand what all their decisions they make are. You'll never be able to audit the amount of money or, what sort of money they're putting in any given time. And the levers that they're even pulling aren't even directly related to the ultimate outcome that they're wanting to create, right? They only have a couple levers, and those are supposed to somehow properly adjust kind of this economic supply of value that we have for the world. So, on its face, it's an incredibly crazy and ridiculous concept. And the only reason why it exists is because it was necessary early on, because you needed the ability to trust that the money that you were using had value. And for the U.S. and other countries too, but we're in the U.S., we'll talk about the U.S. It was the fact that the government said it had value, that everyone could accept and feel comfortable in holding their value in the U.S. dollar. But I think that we're beyond that, both as citizens of kind of the world, and as just where we're headed as a civilization. We have to be beyond that sort of one central force telling you what's real, what's valuable.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and it's very, very, very interesting. I want to shift gears slightly and go to something you said a little bit earlier. So part of your role at the magazine and the corporation is assisting with planning the conference, the Bitcoin conference, which I went to this past couple weeks ago in Miami. Really, really enjoyed it. And one announcement I saw about Bitcoin, because you made this analogy about how it's difficult to provide water infrastructure everywhere, but we can just beam internet to everyone. But Bitcoin is actually being involved with the Charity Water Foundation, and that was a big announcement made at the conference. Do you mind elaborating on what that was and how Bitcoin is being used actually to assist with water in addition to these financial implications?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and background on myself, I was actually director of content for the conference. So all the speakers, all the content, everything, that all flowed through me. It was a ton of fun. I'm glad you got to see it. I hope you didn't have to wait in line too long on day one. But it was a crazy line. We weren't ready for that. But so talking about Charity Water a little bit, Scott Harrison runs this nonprofit called Charity Water. They're one of the first nonprofits to accept Bitcoin. They accepted it back in 2013 or 2014. The person who sends them Bitcoin is Tony Hawk, and he immediately sells the Bitcoin that he gets for dollars, and then uses that to build wells in Africa for folks who don't have access to potable drinking water, right? That Bitcoin has since basically 100x'd in value. And had he held on to it, he would have been able to do 100 times kind of the benefit that he could have had in Africa. And, it wasn't like he desperately, direly needed to spend that money right there. It's a very well-funded charity. They have the ability to kind of take these financial decisions and try and execute on them. It's just that, at the time, he didn't understand what, a global store of value meant in terms of being able to, store your value and grow your value. So, Scott basically created this new donor-advised fund that the folks who invest into or who send Bitcoin as part of their gift or donation to the charity, there is an understood ask from the investor that the charity hold on to that Bitcoin for 5 years. which would basically grant it another cycle in, a halving cycle for Bitcoin, which we can get into later. But effectively, an assumed another price run. And so there would be some amount of appreciation on that Bitcoin. So I think that he succeeded in getting his 100 Bitcoins that he was looking for. And now he'll be holding on to those for the next 5 years. And once he's able to do that, then he'll be using that basically to help provide potable drinking water all across Africa. And I mean, 100 Bitcoins in 5 years could be, maybe, it could be upwards of $100 million. I mean, it really could. So, I think it's going to be a really great case study in terms of, the kind of good that sort of capital and just the ability to have a store of value can do for the world.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. I wonder what it would be worth if he had held on to all of it that he'd ever gotten. And I hope that at the end of the 5 years, he's able to deploy that and do a lot of good for a lot of people. What from the conference are you most proud of?
Oh gosh. So, I'll answer kind of the cheesy answer, and then I'll answer, specifically in my lane. I'm proud of the team, right? Like, none of us are experts at throwing a conference. We had thrown a 2019 conference that had like 1,800 people there, and this one had 12,000 people there, right? So we were all just making it up as we went. I mean, we had no clue what we were doing. And we really executed, and with the minor hiccups like the lines, not enough bathrooms, that kind of stuff, it really was a success, and on a large scale, very, very successful. So, that would be what I'm most proud of. And then specifically in the content, I would say that, we had this great surprise of the El Salvador announcement that we were holding on to, keeping secret, doing our best to be tight-lipped about, because Jack asked us, he was like, please just don't tell anyone about this beforehand. And we were like, okay, we won't. And so, yeah, it was that moment of being able to deliver maybe some of the biggest news in the history of Bitcoin that, for those who don't know what we're talking about, El Salvador announced that they would be making Bitcoin legal tender for the country. So, that happened at the conference. It was a really emotional time. People cheered, people cried, people laughed. It was people applauded, standing ovations. So that probably was very cathartic for me, and it definitely made it feel like kind of everything was worth it, because we were able to just create this platform for this giant step forward for a global currency.
Yeah, I was in the room for that announcement, and it was absolute insanity when that was revealed. I mean, the build up was insane, and then when the tension was released and everyone it was made. I mean, you couldn't hear the president's speech. Like, you could tell what was going on, but you couldn't hear it just because the applause had started so loud before, and the audio was overpowered. It was just such an insane amount of energy when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, so most of our team didn't know the announcement beforehand, and so I was like telling them so that they knew, what to tweet out about it, or, to make sure the journalists from Bitcoin Magazine were all there, but they didn't know what was happening. And so they were all guessing to me, behind the scenes, being like, is it this? Could it be this? No one guessed this, because it was a step function higher of an announcement than anyone was expecting when we were touting this as a huge announcement. So, I really am proud of it, and definitely proud of the work that Jack Mallers is doing, and he's who made the announcement. And yeah, I think that this is the start of something really big, and we're just beginning to see the stage that's being set by this announcement. We're not even seeing the effects yet. We're just seeing the build up to what this is actually going to look like.
Other countries have piled in, right?
Yeah, 100%. So we've got, Paraguay that's putting forth legislation. I think it's July now, so this month. I think that Panama has talked about it. Brazil has had some legislators that have talked about it. It makes total sense, and in hindsight, it should have been obvious that the first countries to adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender, or some sort of currency that they're going to involve with their government, it would be South American countries where the remittance market is so huge, especially into the U.S., where there's at the moment this crazy amount of money printing and uncertainty with what the dollar is going to look like tomorrow. So in hindsight, it was inevitable to pull, a quote from old Elon Musk. But yeah, I just think that this is the domino that's just going to knock over the entire world eventually.
Tax implications? So I know that if like foreign currencies cannot be taxed, or you can't get capital gains on foreign currencies. Have you heard anything else about that? Because I read just like one tweet and I've been telling people about it, and I'm not sure if it's actually true or not.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is, like, no one's exactly sure if it's true or not. We're going to have to see some actual probably court, decidings in order to confirm. But by the letter of the law, it should mean that it's non-taxable now for capital gains, at least when used as a currency and not as an investment. You can still tax, Forex trading, right? It's over like a certain amount. I don't know what the amount is off the top of my head, but there is still capital gains tax on Forex trading. You just have to go over the threshold that, it crosses over in order to be taxable.
So one question I have, it was not as big of a narrative on the main stage at the conference, but a lot of energy for it, like in the conference area, are things like stacks, things like smart contracts on Bitcoin, kind of like Bitcoin sidechains, Bitcoin DeFi was the word I was looking for. What is your take on that? Because that's in like the crypto space at large, that's a really big division. One in terms of narratives, in terms of capital allocation, in terms of developer resources and attention. So what do you think as Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin kind of like realized its usefulness and will kind of stay there and just realize its potential as the world reserve currency? Or is Bitcoin truly have advantages to the Ethereum, Solana, this kind of ecosystem for smart contracts and DeFi applications?
Yeah, really good question. I didn't realize you guys were so well versed in Bitcoin and crypto. This is fun. I didn't know what sort of conversation we were going to have, but I'm excited that we kind of get to dive a little bit deeper. So great question to talk about kind of smart contracts on Bitcoin. That's definitely being built right now. Stacks is block stacks, smart contract platform layer 2. You have RSK. You have I guess those are kind of the main two. RGBs being built out. You've got Liquid, and so there's a lot of different smart contract capabilities being built kind of layer 2 on Bitcoin. It can't happen on layer 1 because the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin is that the smart contract scripting language on layer 1 of Bitcoin isn't sophisticated enough, or it's so data intensive to try and actually do a smart contract that it's just not worth it, right? So something like Ethereum kind of emerged as a layer 1 smart contract layer. It's obviously gotten tons of, investment and developer acumen, and, just an entire ecosystem has emerged. This whole DeFi narrative has come. You definitely see what looks like a very successful ecosystem. And, I'm not, and our company is Bitcoin only. We're Bitcoin focused. We're not anti other cryptos. We just think that ultimately, like, Bitcoin is the signal. Everything else, can have innovation. There can be, these crazy kind of jumps, but that there's nothing that Bitcoin can't absorb onto its own value layer. And that ultimately the biggest innovation was the ability to basically have a decentralized currency. I mean, that's the 98%, and everything else is just kind of interesting, bells and whistles to put on top of it. So let's look at, DeFi, for instance, right? DeFi is kind of this decentralized finance, what it stands for. The idea is to do, things like permissionless lending, permissionless leverage, which is really what the lending's for, right? It's generally getting leverage on, your ETH token or the Solana, whatever it is, right? And so, all of that stuff is interesting, and it's really cool that it's being built out. I think Uniswap is probably the coolest project that's been, rolled out in recent years. And so, that's awesome. That can all be built on Bitcoin now, using a layer 2. And ultimately, Bitcoin should be the value token that's being transacted through those things. So it's like, what are you getting leverage on? Well, you're getting leverage on Bitcoin. What are you lending? Oh, you're lending out Bitcoin. That's where Bitcoin plugs in. And so, does Ethereum need to exist, long term? I don't think so. I really don't. And, I'm not saying that as like a hater. I'm not saying that as like a non-believer that, some of the things that they've created is valuable. I'm just saying it from the standpoint of like, the real innovation is the ability to decentralize a currency, and that anything else, if it's open source, it can be built over onto that decentralized currency onto Bitcoin. And so that's where I think the entire market's going to head. I'm getting long-winded here, but the last thing that I'll mention on this is that right now you see most of DeFi yields coming through basically new governance tokens that are being invented that people are then yield farming and selling for a stable coin or for ETH or something else, right? And so it's not really it's not sustainable, at least not at these crazy yields that you see of 10,000% annual or even 200%. I mean, it'll collapse down very quickly to probably something closer to like a 4 to 8% annual yield on basically anything. And the only thing that's keeping that alive is more and more of these other tokens that are supposed to be governance tokens for some other platform that does the same thing as another platform with a slight twist. And everyone's going to FOMO into that token, which means it has value when people get it farmed out to them. So, a lot of that I'm a little bit more skeptical and not as excited about. But, a lot of people are making a lot of money, and those people are going to stick on the ecosystem that made them that money.
Yeah, that
so
was what I was about
it'll
to
have
ask.
some real staying power.
Yeah, in the long run, and you can interpret that how you'd like to, if it's a winner-take-all dynamic or if it's not. And that's... I'll let you riff on that for a second here.
Yeah, I'll be quick on this one. I think it's ultimately winner take all, and Bitcoin will win and take all, but Ethereum will continue to exist, and it'll still have value. It's just that value will be denominated in Bitcoin. And so, the ETH trading pair will be ETH over BTC, not ETH over USD, right? And so from that perspective, ETH will continue to exist. I don't know if it'll be as valuable because there's not these unfederated ways to wrap Bitcoin onto Ethereum. I think actually Ren BTC maybe is unfederated now, so a little bit more trustless. But what you really need is a way for, if I have Bitcoin sitting on the Bitcoin chain, I can send it onto the Ethereum chain and receive some wrapped Bitcoin on there without any risk of any part of that being seized by a government, by a bad actor, by a hacker. I need it to be totally permissionless, auditable, and bug free. And that takes a lot of work, a lot of trust right now, and I just don't see that being a robust aspect of the market yet.
Thanks, Brandon, for that nuanced answer. My next question is actually surrounding Tether. And for those who don't know, Tether is a stablecoin that a lot of people use to buy Bitcoin. But my question is the Tether Conspiracy just regular old FUD, or is it the end of Bitcoin as we know it today?
That's a great question. I'll give you two different answers that seem counter, but they're actually not. One, the Tether stuff is complete FUD. And two, Tether will eventually collapse and be worthless. So, here's the most important thing to understand with Tether is that, yes, there's a lot of obscurity. But if these guys were bad actors, they could have run away with so much money before anyone was paying any attention at all. And they would have gotten away with it. And they could be sitting on private islands right now. And they could have, yanked the rug. And it would be game over. No one could stop them. They've succeeded, right? They didn't do it. They could have done it in 2014. They could have done it in 2015, 2016. They didn't. So we know these guys a little bit. Everything that we've talked to them about, they are good actors. They're trying to build an interesting stablecoin. Specifically with some of the reserve stuff that you hear about. I couldn't tell you, obviously I'm not either an accountant or a lawyer, right? I can't tell you what the reserves that they hold actually are and amount to, or why, it's so heavy into paper. What I will say is that, in 2018, they had around, I think it was $800 million sitting in an offshore bank account because no banks will bank crypto companies, including ours, right? We're a media company in Bitcoin, right? and no banks would bank us because we had Bitcoin in our name. It's a fact. It's a matter of the ecosystem. It's why when Brian Brooks was the OCC comptroller, one of the biggest things that he did is he said that banks are not allowed to discriminate on companies based on whether they touch or are involved in the crypto ecosystem, right? It was a huge move because up until then, you had folks like Tether who had to get in bed with some, questionable banks that you didn't really know what other lines of business the bank had, but they were willing to take your money and hold it for you, right? And so it's like, everyone needs access to banks if you're going to be, holding reserves in US dollars for your Tether, right? Like you have to have a bank account somewhere. And so this bank got seized by the courts in New York, and they lost somewhere around $800 million worth of their US dollar reserves. And this was back when, maybe Tether was a $3 billion asset. So, that's almost a third of all of their reserves getting just seized right there. Well, when that happens, they are not fully backed anymore, right? Like they don't have that money. They don't know if they're ever going to get that money back, or if it's going to be wrapped up in whatever this bank did. And so, in that moment was basically when they changed the wording on their website to be like totally backed or mostly backed by dollar or like cash equivalents, right? And so then, I am no sleuth at all, but it was pretty easy to back out that, their other company that they have is Bitfinex, which is an exchange. And they basically took a loan from Bitfinex to be able to cover their reserves. That was like the cash equivalent. And it's like an IOU back to Bitfinex. And, they okayed it because they run both companies. And like that's shady, which I get. But it was also like a desperate time. They had to be back. So it was like, this is what we can do without any banking relationships overnight, basically. So, they did what they could. It was a bad situation. That's when all the Tether FUD really started blowing up, right? And what's interesting is that, it was clear to me, and it was clear, to anyone in the industry, like a lot of this is unfounded. Now, why do they sit in this paper, whatever it's called, and not U.S. dollar anymore? I have no clue. I couldn't tell you. But I would assume that it's out of necessity or because it's, just a better way of holding the dollars than it is about there being some sort of issue with Tether's solvency. Long-winded part there. Now, what the other part? Sorry, you keep cutting out, but the other part of it is Tether eventually will fail, right? They have too many centralized points of failure to not fail. And a quote that people kind of use is "Every empire falls, every business fails," right? So Tether will eventually fail, just like everything else, and except Bitcoin. And, that's just an inevitability. And it may happen soon because, ultimately when you're dealing with all of this banking stuff, like having to jump from bank to bank all the time, having to constantly, be the best accountants in the room to be able to make sure that your reserves are fully backed, all that kind of stuff. Like, and it's the US dollar. Like it's going to go to zero eventually anyway. So all that being said, however it fails, I'm not worried about that being a systemic risk to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is ultimately, orders of magnitude, but way bigger than Tether could ever hope to be. And it's not reliant on Tether in order to succeed. There's no printing of Tether to buy Bitcoin that isn't, backed by other cash. Like it's not happening. That's the FUD. So long term, it will fail.
Obviously, I missed a lot of that
up in your head?
because of
oh yeah,
because I had to refresh. But
have some trouble.
Right, I will play it back. I think it's still unclear to me whether or not the printing of Tether is not holding the price of Bitcoin up in the short term. I agree that Tether blowing up today wouldn't crash Bitcoin forever, and I think it'd be a great time to buy in for sure. And that it is FUD, but I think there's a lot of dishonesty going on. However, the very first thing you said about how they could have walked away with so much money already. That's the thing that I keep coming back to. It's like if they were it just doesn't make any sense from an incentive standpoint. If they were trying to screw everybody over, they could have walked away with hundreds of millions of dollars already. Right. The second thing, the second piece of FUD, though, is about this sort of, I feel like it's a narrative violation from Satoshi's original vision of, peer-to-peer cash. I think, it's now digital gold, and I subscribe to that narrative, but I think that, it's a little incongruent. And so I wanted to hear what you had to say about about this divergence from the original vision of Satoshi.
So, shout out to a guy named Alan Farrington. He's brilliant. He is the emoji of a squirrel not emoji. It's Bullwinkle the squirrel, I think, on Twitter is his avatar. He wrote a really great piece. He's written a lot of really great pieces, but called Wittgenstein's Money. And there's like the old, I don't know if it's really a true story, but like Wittgenstein talking to Copernicus, talking to, folks who were talking about, whether the sun revolves around the earth revolves around the sun, right? I'm butchering the story, but the point of it is that Wittgenstein comes out and says, look, I know that the sun revolves around the earth, right? I would never question that sort of understood fact, but imagine what it would look like if the earth did revolve around the sun. And how would that look? And let's just talk through that and see what it would look like. And so he kind of takes this same idea and he's like, all right, of course, Bitcoin will never be, a global currency, a decentralized currency, right? But if you did have a decentralized currency emerge totally permissionlessly, like no government backed it, what would that necessarily have to look like? Okay, and where I'm going with this is that right now, when you look at kind of what does a currency need to be, there's kind of like a trope that, it has to be a store of value, a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and I think a fourth one that no one really cares about, right? But so the idea is it needs to solve all of these different problems or have all these different functions. And I think what we're beginning to realize, or at least what I'm beginning to realize, is that as a decentralized form of money occurs, it kind of has to take each of those use cases step by step. And so in order to be a medium of exchange, it first has to be a store of value. And so what we're really watching is the store of value phase of Bitcoin unfold, where it doesn't make sense to want to spend your Bitcoin if it's going to be worth so much more tomorrow. And it's not so much more because it's a deflationary currency. It's so much more because the amount of users, the growth in the network, the adoption curve of it, we're still on the early end of it. And so, there will be some, day in the future where it is fully adopted or, approximately fully adopted. And in that point, you have still a store of value and it will still go up in value, but it's not going to be skyrocketing with crazy volatility and, all the stuff that we're seeing right now with kind of the speculative instrument of it, where people are betting on it becoming the ultimate currency, right? There will be a moment where it is. So that's the phase that we're in right now. And that, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of people's opinions, if you kind of look at, well, how does it have to emerge, right? It has to be the store of value first. And then that doesn't preclude it from later being the medium of exchange. And so what really matters is all right, I count Bitcoin as a store of value. Kyle, you count Bitcoin as a store of value. So we could transact in Bitcoin now without either one of us needing to settle onto, a US dollar layer because we both see it as a store of value. If I saw it as a store of value and you didn't, then I could still, use it as a medium exchange, but you'll be converting it in the back end immediately to dollars, and that's a less useful instrument. And so, that exists today. There's tons of places where you can, exchange Bitcoin and it's being, sold to dollars on the back end without anyone noticing. And that's just again, it's part of the step towards hyper Bitcoinization when everyone's using it as a medium of exchange and a unit of account.
No, I think that's extremely interesting.
Is that a good answer? Is there something that I'm not hitting
before?
And then I'd add to that if Bitcoin's to become a currency, right? Currencies are the monetary premium, if I'm understanding this correctly, is the value of a currency relative to its intrinsic value or something. It's the value of printed paper with dollar signs on it relative to the utility of the paper. And there's a price discovery phase where that curve of happens, and then it eventually, as Brandon's saying, settles in. And so you could say that Bitcoin's in the price discovery phase. and until it settles at a normal monetary premium. Because I mean, you got to think of the monetary premium of paper relative to of paper money relative to its actual intrinsic value. Please.
Is it not
on
on
yet?
yet?
To put my hyper bull hat on right here, I would say that the real price discovery phase. Yeah, I know, right? The real price discovery phase is everyone coming to the same realization that I have, that Bitcoin is the future global currency. And, what does that look like in terms of price? Well, it looks like there's 21 million Bitcoins. It looks like infinity divided by 21 million. I mean, we're talking about all the value in the entire world divided by 21 million. I mean, it's like value is being created constantly by us interacting, by us creating new things, by new inventions. It's literally infinity divided by 21 million. So that's the realization people have to get to. That's the ultimate game. And I would say that vast majority of people who even know about Bitcoin still just see it as kind of a speculative asset.
If that's true, and you take it to its extreme, so let's say it's 2200, the year is 2200, we're a spacefaring civilization. How is Bitcoin transacted amongst a spacefaring civilization? And also, how locationally dependent is Bitcoin? Does it have to be do you think two parties have to be on Earth in order for it to transact, or could it be two spaceships far? How do you think that works? And is it limited by? Would it be limited by the speed of light?
Yeah. So this is a question that I feel like I've thought too much about in terms of where most people spend their time. There's a guy, Dhruv Bansal. He's CTO at Unchained Capital. He has some great articles on this, and it's all stuff I'm not going to take away from him because he encapsulates it so well, but it's all stuff that I thought about and kind of arrived at the same conclusions without having read it first, right? And so what you see is, first off, no one's going to space with gold
definitely
bars
not fiat.
or fiat currency. No one's taking coins. That's weight. That's that's crazy to think that anyone's going. So the money will be digital. When we're a seafaring civilization, the money has to be digital. What you have right now with Bitcoin is this whole mining aspect, right? And when you mine a block, let's take the actual download speed and make it negligible. Let's make it 0, right? So as soon as you receive the block, you have it. It's fully downloaded, right? There is a 10-minute block time on average in between blocks. So basically, you need the previous block in order to mine the next one, right? So if I'm going to mine or confirm transactions, I need to get this next block as soon as possible so that I can start mining the next one and maybe potentially get it, right? Maybe potentially win that contest and mine the next block, right? So if it takes 10 minutes per block, and I'm 11 minutes away, then I'm going to be at a crazy disadvantage that basically I can't mine on the same chain, because as soon as I get this block, there's already a second block being put through the Bitcoin pipeline.
You mean
all the
11
rest of
light
these
minutes?
nodes that are closer to what we'll call the center of hash.
This
So
is
yeah,
back
it'd be
in
like
the
11
minute, I think.
light minutes.
Okay,
Yeah,
keep going.
11 information minutes. Yeah. Well, so if I'm 11 light minutes away, I effectively cannot mine on the chain because the blocks are being found before I can even receive them. The next one's already being found, right? So what this means is basically, you have a 10-minute horizon in all directions from the center of hash, and let's just call the center of hash Earth broadly, because the amount of time that it takes for information to go from the U.S. to China is negligible in terms of finding the next block. So 10 minutes, 10 light minutes in all directions is basically the extent to which you can mine Bitcoin and still be competitive on chain. Mars is, I think, 14 minutes away, light minutes away. So Mars is basically already outside of the ability to mine on Bitcoin. That means that Mars will have to have another currency that it is using basically to transact for any economic stuff that happens there. Necessarily. Either that, or you're going to have effectively a war take place, where you have, there's hash power on Mars, there's hash power on Earth. Both are mining Bitcoin, and they're going to then mine as many blocks in a row as they can, and then send those blocks to Earth, where then they'll have the longest chain, longer than Earth, and so then their blocks get accepted. This is all really complicated, but basically, like it's just a war that would take place. So let's now assume that these two planets would have kind of each their own Bitcoin. What you would then need is a settlement layer between those two blockchains, those two different Bitcoins. And so what we then get into is effectively creating a separate solar system wide blockchain, where I would say that you would expect the block time to be somewhere on the on the scale of like a light year, or even not a light year, but like basically the time that it takes for light to get from the sun to Pluto, right? And so then you can mine on this chain both on Mars and on Earth and on Jupiter and on the asteroid belt and wherever else you kind of are mining, and you won't be kind of disconnected from this settlement layer or have it speed off without your ability to have confirm transactions or have input. So then ultimately what you have is a Mars chain, a Bitcoin on Earth chain, a solar system chain. All right, what if we become intergalactic? Well, now you need a chain that's a settlement layer across entire galaxies. So then the block time on that is going to be light years and light years and light years. It'll take more people will be born and die in the amount of time that it takes for a block to be found in this chain than have existed in all of civilization. Like, I mean, it's crazy to kind of get to these levels of what this would look like. And I think the coolest part, and I'll stop rambling here, but like the coolest part is what you're really creating is like a heartbeat for information and value to settle. And so you have like this galactic heartbeat that every let's say 1,000 years there's another block that gets found, right? And then you have the heartbeat of our solar system that is every, let's say, 200 days another block gets found. And then you have the heartbeat of Earth, where it's every 10 minutes a block gets found. And it's like that sort of pulsating like ecosystem of how value gets settled across all of these different chains with all these different time horizons. And the last thing I'll say on this is that maybe the thing that we should be looking for in terms of extraterrestrial life and extraterrestrial intelligence is a block getting propagated from another planet, and it's just flying right by us, and we can either see it and recognize it and confirm it, or it'll just
I'm really glad that I asked that question.
So there's your
it has me thinking about the proof of work. There's got to be a little arbitrage opportunity at like 9.5, like 9.99 light minutes away, because you could like, I don't really know, maybe like you could send back, because the way the proof of work works is that when you solve the problem, it sends that solution out to every node in the network, right? And so if every node in the network were to get that after, I'm rambling. I mean, obviously I have no idea what I'm talking about, but there's got to be something interesting at those intersection points.
So what you could do, what it would like, what would make sense is to create a space station that's somewhat like halfway between Earth and Mars, and have it just filled to the brim with miners, and that would actually move the center of hash off of Earth and to this point that's equidistant to Earth and Mars, and then that way you would have roughly equal competition of Earth finding a block or Mars finding a block, with the one caveat that most of the blocks would be found on this spaceship, where among other things, it's got to be incredibly hot there. You would need nuclear fusion to be happening at a crazy rate in order to power all these miners. I mean, it's just its own kettle of fish in terms of figuring out how that would work.
In your life,
but I think that's how it would
as
probably
excited
look.
To talk about as Bitcoin?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that like the interesting thing that Bitcoin does is it gives you a bit of an irreverence for things that are accepted as true. And so you can take that lens and view all sorts of stuff that we accept as true through kind of this skeptical, well, what if it's not true kind of lens. And, you know, one of the things that I was just talking to some of the folks at the company about, and, you know, our CEO and I kind of always like to riff on is ancient civilization. And this is like, you know, about the nerdiest thing that you can possibly talk about, right? But we have been taught growing up that ancient civilization began in Mesopotamia in the Fertile Crescent around like 4500 BCE, right? Everyone's learned that. You know, you had the Tigris and Euphrates, all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. There's a site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe that has been unearthed, you know, I think in the 60s or 70s, but it was made a World Heritage Site in 2018 that dates back to 12,000 BC, right? That's like double, effectively, the oldest civilization thing that we've ever found. And in this site, it looks like it's a religious site. There's no evidence of people living there, but they have these giant monoliths, like 200-ton monoliths that have been built for this religious site that just exists in the middle of the freaking desert, and it doesn't fit into the puzzle of what we think ancient civilization looks like at all. And then, you know, you're like, okay, well, if civilization was complex enough to build this crazy complex religious site in the middle, you know, of what's now a desert, maybe it wasn't at the time, like that takes real coordination, that takes tools, that takes skills, that takes laborers. I mean, it takes so much. There's an entire history to what we actually, like how we actually got here, that no one is accurately asking the questions to explore. And, you know, one of the things that immediately opens up is it's like, all right, if civilization didn't start in ancient Mesopotamia in 4500 BCE, what could we look at as like an event that is relevant towards our history? And it's like, well, the last ice age ended around 50,000 years ago. Okay. And then at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose about 300 to 350 feet. Well, one thing that would do immediately is you would look at the Strait of Gibraltar, and that would put the water level of the Atlantic Ocean below the Strait of Gibraltar. And so if that's the case, you could be looking at the Mediterranean basin, and you could say, well, maybe that wasn't even filled with water at the time. Or maybe it was, you know, lakes and rivers and streams and stuff like that. Maybe there's groundwater. It could have been a full Mediterranean Sea. Who knows? All I know is that the Strait of Gibraltar that connects the Mediterranean to the Atlantic was above water during the last ice age. And what that means is that we could actually be looking at basically all of ancient human civilizations being buried underwater, either in the Mediterranean Sea. It could be just in coastal areas around Africa, India, you know, who knows? But that's an entire, you know, history of us that we're not even asking the right questions to be able to uncover. So really, you know, all of that is probably just buried under the water somewhere, and we're not even looking for it. So that's something that fascinates me. You know, I've listened to him on a couple podcasts. I think he's interesting. I think that, you know, I'm not an expert enough to say whether what he's talking about is accurate or inaccurate, but I think that it makes a lot of logical sense, and I feel like he's at least asking the right questions. Now we need the data. Now we need, you know, the scientists to actually go examine and try and, you know, figure out whether some of these ancient history kind of things that he's spinning are correct. Yeah, but on their face, they seem incredibly logical.
Probably deservedly so at some points, but like, you know, he's fighting against a bureaucracy of people that is like, you know, a big anthropology, and like he can't. He is saying that what they are preaching is not true, and it comes back to what you're saying about this irreverence for you know, the big brother. It's like, I don't really care what you tell me is true. I'm going to go out and look for evidence of that. And I think that we're sort of in the price discovery phase of ancient history. And I wish that I had brushed up before we had this conversation.
Yeah,
but I think
I would have to agree.
I've dived into it a little bit in the past when I was younger, and there is there's little that is as interesting as some of the deductions that you can get to when really the deductions that other people have said that I've heard from like things like Globeki Teki, or however you say it, and all these other super interesting anomalies.
Yeah, the reason why that was top of mind is that there was just an article that came out yesterday that found 11 other hills around Göbekli Tepe that are now all being dug up as archaeological sites dated around the same time. So it's like, all right, we thought Göbekli Tepe was this crazy cool thing that was just found. There's 11 other sites now to look at that all have equally important, historical relevance that we've just now found yesterday, or at least published the results from yesterday. So that's something that really is interesting to me. I would say that there's a lot of things in science. I don't want to get your guys' show at all censored or anything, but there's a lot of things in science that there is a exigent system that just there are folks who want to be right who aren't right, and so they will kind of use whatever influence, power, or just tools or levers they can pull in order to keep their narrative true for as long as they're alive, basically. And so that's, I think, this archaeological thing is a really good example. There's stuff happening on the global health conversation that I think are very similar, and I don't have crazy wacky views on this. You don't have to in order to tell that there's a lot of conversations that need to be had that aren't being had, and so I think that's it should be a prescient thing for everyone to be thinking about when they're looking at how all of this has unfolded over the past year and a half, and what it I'm not a doomsayer. I'm not going to spin this up into some crazy big thing, but it's just here's another example of conversations that weren't had. And conversations that we weren't allowed to have in order to kind of get to whatever the ultimate truth around what's going on and what how to evaluate risk and how to make just decisions about your own health. What else interests you guys? What are the things that you guys like to talk about on the show?
That's not as nearly as counterculture. Yeah, not nearly as much counter mainstream culture. A lot of crypto. We've done a lot of crypto. A lot of diet.
On the fitness stuff, are you guys fans of Find My Fitness and dude, I'm reading a really interesting book right now called The Energy Formula by Sean Wells. So he talks about paleo in this too. Actually, I got through that part. But so let's jump past the current pandemic and talk about what's going to happen afterwards. I think that there's going to be this renewed focus on our bodies as machines that metabolize different things, right? And ultimately, all of our cells are just computers, and so they can be hacked. And we have RNA now that can basically create whatever we want inside of our cells. There is so much biomanufacturing to be done. Most materials that we'll probably use in the future will come from cells, yeast cells, protists, whatever we're kind of engineering in order to create these building blocks. And yeah, I mean, this is just an entire field that is waiting to be exploded. And it'll replace kind of the oil and natural gas industries that are currently kind of the bedrock of manufacturing, and it'll replace them with just reactors that are tanks. It's a crazy shift, and this whole pandemic has made it really obvious that shift is coming when we were able to manufacture vaccines within, I think it was 48 hours of
it just took a year
isolating the virus and everything. We had a functioning vaccine. That's the same vaccine that's being put out right now. It just took a year to get all the approvals and testing and the data and all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
stuff where
that's a crazy forefront.
One question I always have for people like yourself that are earlier in their careers, they're part of really interesting projects. They clearly have an enthusiasm for what they're doing. So you can answer this from two perspectives. But what are your driving goals right now with the magazine, with your career? Is it to increase the probability of hyper Bitcoinization? Is it to earn money so you can stack sats yourself because it's already inevitable and you don't have to push, you don't have to get any more momentum. It already has all the acceleration it needs. Where are you kind of at with your career, the company, Bitcoin, like the big priorities for you all? Throwing the greatest parties for the sake of throwing the greatest parties? I know that's on the list for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, personal goal is to, like, I just want to build things that change the world. I'm not in it to really make money myself. That's why, I draw a pretty small salary relative to kind of what our opportunity and what we're pulling in here. It's all about, can we like literally manifest hyper Bitcoinization? Can we make Bitcoin succeed? Like, what can we literally, as a bunch of idiots in Nashville, Tennessee, what can we do to make this thing work and happen? And so, that meant running Bitcoin Magazine. That meant putting on the Bitcoin 2021 conference. That means we have a hedge fund with 50 million AUM. We have an app that we're building that's like a Bitcoin faucet that it has really cool. It's called Carrot. Really cool kind of functionalities there that we're interplaying with our Bitcoin Magazine. I mean, it's all sorts of stuff. We're looking maybe how do we get into the mining play? How do we get into a little bit more of that vertical part of the Bitcoin kind of supply chain? So, I mean, we want to be part of the Bitcoin ecosystem in every function and facet that we can, where we're still utilizing our expertise. And so I anticipate the number of things that we do and the size of our company and the impact that we have on the world to grow. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on doing the next thing. But it's like, this is a absolute vehicle to change the world. And so that's why I wake up every morning trying to just push us a step further and make us succeed. Because if we do succeed, and I think Bitcoin, whether we succeed as a company or not, Bitcoin will succeed. The world will be forever changed, and humanity will be forever helped by the fact that we have now a way for permissionless finance to take place in society. So, that's the goal.
Thanks,
that's the vision.
Brandon.
That's what
It's been a fantastic episode. We really appreciate it.
NGU. It's the technology, man.
And that wraps up our conversation with Brandon Green. I thought he was so smart. And that's something that's one of my takeaways, actually, is just how smart all the people that we've met from Bitcoin Magazine are. They're like not only, Bitcoin bulls and just like really in your face about that, but they have really, really nuanced points on like global politics and like international relations. Those might be the same thing, but shout out David, shout out Brandon, because you guys are really cool. And then the second thing is just how much he had thought about that Bitcoin in space question before we asked it. He went straight to like not only, okay, let's think through this, but like, here are the problems with that and some proposed solutions, like having the center of hash be between Mars and Earth in order to allow for both planets to mine Bitcoin and to use it as one currency. Super funny just how much he thought about that. And then the third, which I think he said like verbatim toward the end, is just generally being skeptical toward commonly held truths, and how like being a Bitcoiner for them is sort of the first thing that they sort of question the commonly held truths, and then that cascades into other areas of their life where they're questioning these commonly held truths. And I think that is and will lead to really positive outcomes for everybody that sort of views life through a lens of like, is that true? Yes or no? Even though everybody around you thinks it's true. And that's a hard thing to do. And I think that you can go overboard with it, and you shouldn't do it like to every little thing. But I think that generally it's good. Just like Bitcoin.
I think the term for that is being red-pilled. You take the red pill, then you start to see, through the matrix on more than just monetary policy. But 3 takeaways from me. One is, this is a dynamic we explore a lot on the podcast, is the career versus business owner, entrepreneur kind of dynamic. So getting a job, working for someone else, learning from them, having the reputation of the company behind you versus kind of starting on your own. I think Brandon is someone who clearly loves what he does at his company, is empowered to get more done, right? Because he has the weight of the magazine behind him. He can hit up any speaker in the Bitcoin space and they'll take his calls because of his credibility being part of such a big organization. And he's gotten there much, much faster than if he was on his own. It's always hard to say the counterfactual, but he seems to have gotten to a good position relatively quickly and be happy. So again, it's not a black and white dynamic being an entrepreneur working for an entrepreneurial company like Bitcoin Media, for one example. Second is kind of what you're saying about that space, how far thought out he was about space. I think that is a symptom in a good way of working at the right type of company with like a culture of no one's there. You don't just like say, well, my job's to be a journalist. So like, what jobs are there in journalism? Oh, there's this Bitcoin company. It's kind of like people who are attracted to some passion, and being in an environment where everyone is obsessive about one thing kind of leads to being this type of person that is constantly intellectually demanded. Because, I mean, we have a friend who works at this company in addition to Brandon, and it sounds like the office culture there is just like all day hardcore debate about like all the nuances about Bitcoin and also all these other world issues. So if you're at a company where that's kind of like your personality type, I think that could be a really cool thing to look for. Then third thing is just get in the game, y'all. If you're listening to this and you're not in the game yet, obviously it's not financial advice, not investment advice, not any of that. But get in the game, stack sats. You don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. I don't know if people don't know that. You can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. It's called a Satoshi, is the smallest increment you can buy. Consider it, but not investment advice. So that's all I have to say for this episode. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for listening. It is actually 4 a.m. where I am. Not even. What time is it? Oh, it's 4:15 a.m. That's just a fun fact. I just felt like sharing that. We have 3 episodes we released in the last 3 weeks, 70 plus in the past 70 weeks. I'd highly encourage you to check those out if you liked what you heard in this episode. Otherwise, we'll be back in a week or so with the next episode. See you then. Bye-bye.